Hey there! I'm Chris, the guy behind this channel, and I spent the better part of a year creating the Infinimart, an animated series mostly on my own. I wanted to share that experience in the hopes that others who are potentially interested in jumping into the world of indie animation get an idea of what to expect. To be clear, this isn't going to be a guide on how to make an animated series, but more of an overall look at what went into this production. But if you are looking for tutorial type content, there are plenty of others on YouTube who have videos on those subjects, such as Toniko Pantoja and Grigg. Also, the information here is not going to be universal for all projects, so your mileage may vary. For example, your definition of animated series might be different from mine. But with all that out of the way, I wanted to start by talking about the budget, something that often comes up with indie animation. So, what did a fully animated 40-ish minute series with multiple sets, characters, music, and sound design end up costing? $10,000. With an asterisk. See, when I was making the show, I was doing it full time. I had just been laid off, and rather than hunting for work, I decided to try pursuing a passion project. I'd also be able to more accurately gauge how long a project of this scope would take. But, because I wasn't actively working, I could also roll my living expenses into production expenses, which would balloon the budget by about 4 times. You could argue that this cost was also just a time cost, but I wanted to share both of these numbers so you can consider what would be more accurate for yourself and your projects. Now, you may look at these numbers and think one of a few things. Wow, that's not bad at all. That seems right. Or, that's pretty expensive. And those are all completely reasonable thoughts. There's a ton of indie animation projects, all with varying scopes and budgets that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to any given show. Personally, I felt the costs were well within reason for what I was able to produce, but that's just me. In any case, with that out of the way, let's dive into the planning stage. To start, I had to put on the first of many hats I'd be wearing for this project, the producer hat. My first order of business was coming up with a plan for how to get the show off the ground. Luckily, I had plenty of professional experience I could lean on when it came to all the visual aspects. But audio was something I had little to no experience on, professional or otherwise. So the breakdown was pretty simple. I'd save money on anything art related and spend money on all things audio. Knowing that, I needed to figure out how to make episodes in a reasonable time frame, with consistency and a level of quality that I would be happy with. Ultimately, I landed on 3 major decisions. It probably goes without saying, but I wanted to make something that was fully animated and looked good. If I had to make a graph of sorts to represent what I wanted, it'd probably look like this. The better something looks, the more time it's likely going to take, which makes sense. But because I had limited time, my sweet spot was probably somewhere around here. So the first decision was that the show would be predominantly rig-based as opposed to hand-drawn. Character rigs, sometimes called puppets, would save me a ton of time by allowing me to manipulate a character model as opposed to having to draw, clean up, and color a character each time. Next, I needed to be able to make backgrounds quickly. To be frank, I'm not much of a painter, and the thought of painting hundreds of backgrounds was not an enticing one. So I thought I'd try and take a different approach. While it would take some time up front, the second decision was to learn a bit of Blender and build out the sets in 3D. Building the sets in 3D would mean I wouldn't have to paint bespoke backgrounds for each shot, and instead use screenshot renders of my 3D sets. With those checked off, I had to make one more big decision. Animation takes a lot of time, and the longer the episode, the longer it would take to complete. I grew up with shows like Dexter's Lab and Looney Tunes, and upon revisiting them, realized they were able to achieve a lot with relatively shorter runtimes. With that in mind, the final decision was that the episodes would range anywhere from 4 to 7 minutes, though some episodes did end up running longer. Though I had a plan, I still couldn't be 100% sure how long it would take to complete an episode, or how much an episode might cost. And, just to be transparent, everyone I asked to help on this project was paid for their time. Even if I can't pay industry standard rates, I wanted everyone to be paid for their work. The only exception to this was my partner, who very graciously lent her free time and talent to this endeavor. I decided I'd make episode 1 from start to finish as a vertical slice to give me a solid idea of how long an episode would take from start to finish. Starting my pre-production process, I decided to finalize my character designs. I had some rough designs for some characters floating around, but needed to refine and give them proper turnarounds, not to mention finishing the designs for other characters. Next, I had to figure out the episode proper. I started that process by writing out little episode outlines, before then just jumping straight into the boarding process. Rather than write out scripts, I opted for a more board-driven approach where I would come up with the dialogue as I storyboarded. I should note that I did save a bunch of time on the boarding process by keeping things very simple. For example, episode 1, I really didn't go beyond the thumbnail stage and just blew those up and used those as my boards. With that done, I then moved on to making my backgrounds in Blender. After modeling, staging, and lighting, I finally had all my visual pieces done. But I still needed a very important thing before I could start animating: voice acting. I reached out to some friends to see if they'd be interested in voicing characters for the show, and they agreed. We recorded remotely since we're all in different areas, and tried our best to get a consistent sound. On that subject, one of my main characters, Mel, does not communicate verbally, but rather through American Sign Language, or ASL. Now, I don't know ASL and thus needed to reach out to an interpreter to figure out how my dialogue could be interpreted via ASL. I hired an interpreter, and she was incredibly helpful and informative, and let me record the sessions for reference so that I could do my best to accurately portray the language. With all that in place, I cut it all together and was finally ready to start animating. I set a goal of 400-ish frames a day, and sometimes I would hit it, sometimes I would miss. In either case, it meant I could average somewhere around 2,000 frames a week. Truth be told, those frame counts are higher than I would have liked, and if I were to have other animators on this project, I wouldn't be asking them to hit those quotas. Also, while I tried to keep to no more than 8 hours a day, there were plenty of nights that went beyond, and sometimes I would work on weekends. I would always try and give myself a break on Sundays though, so I could recover mentally and physically. For comparison's sake, I did have a couple of scenes that were hand-drawn. For reference, those shots took about 2 to 3 days for roughly 200-ish frames of animation. So to put that into perspective, it took me 2 to 3 times the amount of time for about half the work. That's not to say one's better. Both can have their own place, and it's up to the production to decide which approach will fit their project best. Anyway, what that roughly mathed out to was that I'd be able to finish the animation in a month and some change depending on how long the episodes were. After the principal animation was done, I'd send a cut to my sound designer so she could get started on her end. I would also send a cut and cue sheet with musical cues to my composer so that he could get started as well. While they were working on the audio side of things, I would then go back and finish anything I may have left behind, like secondary animation and effects. After that was done, my partner and I would handle the post-work, which involved things like camera focus and lighting. With both of us working on it, it usually wouldn't take too long, though there were some episodes she would handle completely on her own. With all that completed, I would hand my sound designer the final visuals and she would mix all the audio and music together. My partner and I would do a final washdown to catch and fix any errors we noticed, though some errors definitely slipped past. And that was it. Episode 1 was done, and I had a much better idea of how long the process would take. I had started episode 1 in March and finished in April. Now, all I had to do was that. Again. Multiple times. I spent a couple of weeks finishing pre-production, boarding the rest of the episodes, and recording the rest of the VO. After that, I was stuck in the animation mines until late February of 2025. So, here we are, about a year later with Session 0 of the Infinimart behind me. That's 6 episodes of fully animated goodness. It was a ton of work, but I'm super happy with how the show ended up coming out, and I managed to keep costs relatively low on my end. As you can see, there was no real secret or anything, it really was just coming up with a plan and sticking to the plan as closely as I could. Now, would I do it again? Well, let's talk about that, along with what I had hoped would happen and where I'm at currently. I had hoped that by having weekly releases and going beyond a usual pilot episode, that I'd be able to build interest and an audience steadily as the episodes aired. I haven't quite reached as many people as I was hoping for, but that's okay too. The main reason this wasn't a pilot is because I wanted to make the show regardless, and wanted a way to do it that was financially viable for me. But that's not to say that I don't want people to watch, I definitely do, and I'm grateful to anyone that's given the Infinimart a chance and watched all of Session 0. But the reality is it was probably always going to be an uphill battle. It's a brand new show with no pre-existing content or promotion. I'm also not very active on social media, and this channel has been pretty dead since my Hollow Knight short. I'll try and rectify that in the future, but if you're looking for ways to help out shows or creators you like, really the best thing you can do is simply watch, share, and engage. The indie scene is a hotbed of new and exciting ideas right now that thrives off of fan support. Take a look around and you're sure to find something that piques your interest. If this video is interesting to you and you want to know more about indie animation budgets, check out this video by Jellybox. Gene goes into great depth, and as someone who runs his own indie studio, he definitely knows what's up. As for me, well, my next big project is to finish a short that I was working on, so look out for that hopefully in a couple of months. Following that, I have a different short I wanted to try and hit before finally revisiting the Infinimart. Now that Session 0 got a lot of the setup out of the way, I'm really looking forward to just getting in and showing all sorts of shenanigans within the store itself. But that's that. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll try and answer when I can.